Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape Podcast. Hosted by Dr. Holly Krutka, Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. The show highlights SER's role supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming.
Welcome back, listeners. I'm Holly Krutka, and today we're talking with a University of Wyoming alum who studied geology here. Generally on this podcast, we have a couple different things we're attempting to do, and we appreciate you joining us. And so one thing we really like to do is talk about the work being done here at the University of Wyoming, and especially the School of Energy Resources and our partners across the university to work towards our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for Wyoming. But the other thing we like to do is talk to University of Wyoming alum and stakeholders in and around Wyoming to talk about different energy topics and offer general education. And so today's podcast really falls in that second bucket. So I'm here to welcome Christi Barry. Thank you so much for being here. She's a University of Wyoming alum, and I really appreciate you joining us. I know you're a proud UW graduate from what is now called our Geology and Geophysics department. Tell me about your time at UW and how your education prepared you for your career.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Krutka, for inviting me on this podcast and to take part in the Student Distinguished Lecture Series. I'm very excited to be here, and it's also very exciting to see all the changes on the university. It has certainly changed since 1988 when I graduated. I arrived in 1983 to begin my geology career, and right away I noticed that I was just in the presence of the most iconic geology professors, Dr. Snoke, Mears, Boyd, Carol Frost, just incredible and inspirational professors. And I thought, boy, I'm really fortunate to be here at this time, at this place. And anyway, I worked on my geology career. And of course, in the mid-1980s, the petroleum industry kind of took a dip. No one was getting hired. And so, like my classmates, I went ahead and applied to grad schools. And Dr. Mars was very instrumental. I was kind of late in the game in applying, and he said, well, focus on large universities, up-and-coming universities. And at that same time, my fiance was heading to Las Vegas for his pharmacy program, an internship. And so I applied at UNLV. And also one of my favorite professors from Wyoming had transferred to UNLV about a year prior, Dr. Ernie Dubendorfer. And so he was instrumental in helping me get into the program. He was even on my thesis committee. So then I headed off to UNLV for my master's degree.
And I really appreciate you giving that shout out to our Geology and Geophysics department. Fun fact that Dr. Carol Frost, she was actually our first director of the School of Energy Resources and helped us get this off the ground. So yeah, and it's still a really strong relationship. We love to hire their graduates. I'll tell you, they have some great folks coming out. We love to collaborate with their faculty and staff. Okay, so to your journey, after you graduated from UW, you went to the University of Nevada for your master's degree. And what specifically did you study there?
So my thesis project was in the Klamath Mountains, which is also an interest of Art Snoke. So when I gave a speech or a talk at the GSA conference one year, I remember Art Snoke was down there in Tucson to hear me, so that was pretty special. So my thesis area was in the Klamath Mountains, Lower Devonian volcaniclastic deposits. And so, you know, the Klamath Mountains are made up of accreted terrains, just slabs of oceanic crust that's just, slabbed up like a sandwich. And so I was looking at a very small part of it, of volcaniclastic deposits of a volcano that's no longer in existence. And it's interesting to see the diagenesis of those volcaniclastic deposits. The volcanic glass and plagioclase will turn into zeolites. And maybe zeolites are used in industry as filters, and they can be very, very handy to absorb impurities, gases, and all that, which comes into play later on in my career when I got onto the Yucca Mountain project.
Gotcha. So you've worked on some pretty interesting topics, starting with your master's degree and then moving throughout your career. And one of those topics that we're going to talk about today is nuclear waste. Correct. Not something that every kid grows up wanting to work on. So you moved into to this field during your internship with the Department of Energy.
Correct.
And talk about how did that happen? How did you get into this field?
So once I finished all my coursework at UNLV, I was looking for summer internships, and they had a career fair at the Student Union. And so I attended, and Science Applications International Corporation had a booth set up. And I knew they were involved with the Yucca Mountain project, and I went up and spoke to them, and they pretty much hired me on the spot. So I started as an intern for SAIC, which reports directly to the DOE.
Okay, yep.
On the Yucca Mountain project. And they performed the technical and management support service for the Department of Energy on the Yucca Mountain project.
Good. Good plug to our students, by the way. Go to the career fairs.
Absolutely. And talk to people.
Yep. Even if you don't like it, there's some great opportunities there, and it certainly worked out for you. So talking about nuclear waste, which we're going to call also spent fuel, and I know there's some questions around that name as well. When Professor Caleb Hill was here on our podcast, he doesn't like to call it spent fuel because there's still a lot of energy left in it. But bear with me. I'm just going to use that as a common term. So we're going to use it, but we can talk about that as well. But it's obviously nuclear waste or spent fuel, something that's discussed with a lot of passion is a nice way of talking about it. So did you have any concerns when you went into that field, or how did you decide this is what I want to focus on in my career?
So I didn't have any concerns. Once I got onto the project, I met the most incredible people who had come from Oak Ridge, Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos. It was like a big family. They had known each other for decades, working on different nuclear-related projects. And so when they came together on the Yucca Mountain project, none of them had any concerns, so I didn't have any concerns. It was just a very welcoming and highly professional environment to work in.
Great. And when you take a scientific perspective, that kind of changes how you look at things rather than an emotional one. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about, from a scientific perspective, let's talk about spent fuel. So let's start basics. What is it?
So spent fuel are the fuel rods that are no longer generating enough energy. So in the United States, they are switched out approximately every 18 months. So a third of the spent fuel rods are switched out at a time. So first in, first out. And the process of removing 1/3 of those spent fuel rods happens underwater. They are stored then underwater for up to 5 years, right there on site. And then at that point, they will be moved into dry cask storage. And that's where they are stored today. And currently we have 90,000 metric tons of spent fuel being stored around the United States.
And is that process of switching out nuclear fuel, is that the same no matter what type of nuclear reactor you're working with?
I believe so.
Okay. And I think, it's really interesting. One of the key points that is such an advantage for nuclear energy is that what you just hit on is that it can use the same fuel for 18 months, right? Or these rods are getting changed out 18 months. I mean, that is, in terms of energy density, there's nothing close. Energy density just meaning the amount of fuel you need to make the amount of energy. It's incredible, really.
Right.
So, okay, so spent fuel is sitting in a cask, which is essentially a concrete
and steel.
Box, yeah.
They can hold this nuclear fuel for up to 100 years. So in 1956, the National Academy of Science determined that deep geologic disposal and storage of high-level nuclear waste was the best route to go. And so they directed the DOE to find a location. And they started looking at many locations around the country, eventually narrowed it down to Hanford, Washington, and Duff Smith County, Texas, and Yucca Mountain, Nevada. And in 1982, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act directed them to, one, they had to contain it for 10,000 years, so keep it isolated from the public domain for 10,000 years. The DOE was in charge of it, that only users of the nuclear power would be charged, not taxpayers would be charged to pay for all of this. And in 1987, they narrowed it down to just Yucca Mountain.
Gotcha. So when you're storing it, so you're talking about the Department of Energy responsible for finding permanent storage. What is happening to this spent fuel as it ages?
It's just gradually losing its power, but the United States does not reprocess their fuel. They have not done that. In 1973, it was determined that the United States would not reprocess.
Let's talk, what do you mean by reprocess?
So that means think of it as a sponge, but squeezing more of the energy out.
Right.
It's still very hot when it is removed from the nuclear reactors.
So the key is that, like, for example, in France, they go back a long time reprocessing their fuel, which means when those rods are pulled out of the reactor, they still have a lot of energy left in them. They've lost energy. It's been consumed and used to create electricity. But if you were to what is called reprocess, you could still harness a lot of that energy.
Exactly.
And that's why Dr. Hill doesn't like us calling it spent fuel, even though we're doing it. So, okay,
exactly.
Because there's still a lot of energy there.
Right.
It's still fuel.
And France gets 80% of their fuel, their energy from nuclear.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. So why do you think passions are so high when we talk about nuclear energy versus other types of energy?
Well, the general public, one, doesn't understand a lot about nuclear power, and it is complicated.
Yeah.
The regular citizen is probably not going to understand the chemistry. And also they hear about just the bad events. They hear about Chernobyl and Fukushima, and both of those instances were pretty isolated. It took a 9.0 earthquake to damage Fukushima. Chernobyl was just an archaic design with many human errors, one after another. So our design here in the United States is nothing like that. Nuclear power is very clean and safe, and those of us who have worked in the industry have no concerns at all.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is this is, if not it has to be one of the most regulated industries in the U.S. So before a new power plant using nuclear energy is sited, there's all kinds of work that has to be done. And it's been a great opportunity here at the University of Wyoming. So for example, we have a different type of reactor. It's the Natrium reactor. It's an advanced reactor, which has all kinds of inherent safety designs. It's being built here in Wyoming, and it's under construction today. And they were actually able to fund a geology and geophysics student to do some of the subsurface work around looking at seismic activity in the area. Of course, there's so much backup, but what a great opportunity for that student who was able to work on this first of a kind project. So super exciting, A lot of opportunities for the state.
Exactly. So. Yeah, there's so many opportunities for the energy students, geology, geophysics in this state.
Yeah, tons of opportunities. And here's a plug, is that we are looking at working with our friends over at the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences. We're working towards creating the curriculum for a nuclear energy science certificate. So one for undergrad and graduate. So quick plug there.
Yes.
So how do you feel like sentiment around nuclear energy has changed? Is it more positive, less positive? How do you feel? More optimistic, less optimistic about nuclear energy going forward?
I'm feeling more optimistic, and just because the country is heading toward more diverse energy forms, and it has to include nuclear in that whole equation. Right now we get 20% of our energy from nuclear. We've kind of been at that percentage for a long time. I'd love to see it increase tremendously. And so I think it's a great time for this Natrium power plant to be going in, and for the School of Energy Resources to get highly involved.
And the whole state. This is a great
Exactly.
opportunity for us. So, okay, let's get back to your expertise on the spent fuel side. So in your career, you provided project management to the Department of Energy on the Yucca Mountain project.
Yes.
So you've mentioned that a couple times. So the goal was to store the nation's spent fuel in Yucca Mountain. And I think many people might know, but not everyone. So can you explain what exactly, when we say Yucca Mountain project, what does that entail? What does that mean?
Okay, Yucca Mountain is located out approximately 60 miles northwest of Las Vegas, and it's on the Nevada test site and also on Nellis Air Force Range land. So it's already on government property. It's extremely remote out there. Yucca Mountain was chosen for really 5 main reasons. First of all, it's a very arid environment. They only get 7 inches of rain a year, and it's estimated 5% gets down to the water table. So very little water is infiltrating. Being on government land is great. It's also in the unsaturated zone. It's 250 meters above the regional water table. It's had pretty minor tectonic activity recently, but the main thing was it's in a very thick section of densely welded tuff, which is volcanic, very hot. Tuff is volcanic ash that is deposited.
And I appreciate you.
I know.
You're trying really hard to explain this to the layperson. So you're doing great. Keep going.
Yeah, welded tuff is when there's a volcanic eruption, and it's rhyolitic, which is rich in silica. It's so hot that the particles will weld together as they are deposited. So welded tuff is extremely dense. And also it contains those zeolites, which I talked about earlier. Volcanic glass and plagioclase will start to recrystallize almost immediately, and they're very unstable. And so if those zeolites come in contact with anything that leaks, any impurities, gases...
Yeah, you have a natural filter built in.
A natural filter is built in. And so it's hard to imagine any other location in the United States that would check so many boxes.
Yeah.
That's why Yucca Mountain was selected.
Thank you so much for all the background. So when you were working on the Yucca Mountain project, you were responsible for different outreach activities that you had to present to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and you volunteered for public outreach to educate local residents about what this project was, what you were trying to accomplish. So what were the most common concerns you heard about in your time working on this project, both inside and outside the project?
So I think we were fighting an uphill battle in the realm of public opinion. First of all, the Nevada test site had been out there since the 1940s. They had done over 900 atomic tests out there from the 1940s until 1992. So Nevada residents were already on edge about that.
But that's interesting because that is so much more intrusive than just storing the spent fuel. So can you talk about what you heard a little more?
There was mystery about the atomic tests.
Okay, because of the mystery. Okay.
And there's also a mystery about the Yucca Mountain project, which is why we needed to get a public outreach program going. So it was really fortuitous that they built an information center on the west side of Las Vegas, just a state-of-the-art museum, really, to explain the Yucca Mountain project. It showed videos of the transportation process, the cask designs, and the whole construction and design process of Yucca Mountain. And so another outreach program that we started was to invite Nevada citizens to go on bus tours on Saturdays. And they would meet at this information center, and we could volunteer to be tour guides. And so I would volunteer to do that. And so we'd fill up these nice luxury buses with Nevada residents, and I'd have about an hour and a half from Las Vegas up to the actual site to answer any questions on the way out. Of course, they're very skeptical and grumpy on the way out. But once we got up there, they got to meet with principal investigators. So we're usually USGS geologists. They get to ask questions. They get to see the drill pads and have the whole scientific process explained to them. They would go to the sample management facility where we would log core, and we'd feed them lunch and bring them back. So then I'd get to answer more questions on the way home.
So talk about how did their questions on the way out and then the way back change?
So their initial perception was, and this was due to the media and the local politicians, it was always referred to as a nuclear dump. So their impression was that it was just a hole in the ground with the spent fuel rods just kind of thrown in there like a mass grave. That was what it was in their head on the way out. And then on the way back, they realized, oh, wow, there was a lot of detail and scrutiny and science going on in this. This is nothing like I expected. And so at the end, I would ask for a raise of hands. Okay, who's in favor now of continuing with the Yucca Mountain project? And overwhelmingly, they'd raise their hands.
Yeah.
So
wow,
we just needed to get a lot more people on the buses.
Yeah. And it's so great that you were able to do that and reach those folks. Like you said, you still had to reach more, but communicating really complicated energy topics is tough. And it feels like we need almost an infinite number of options. It's one of the reasons we started this podcast, but it's just, everyone's so busy. It's really tough to get people on a bus.
Exactly.
And get them out there.
And I commend them for taking the initiative to learn. Yeah.
And you, of course, the folks that got on your bus were probably they were ready to learn.
Exactly.
Otherwise you don't get on a bus. So it didn't ultimately move forward. And so is that because from your perspective, just not enough people got to see it, or there's too much opposition?
The political and social opposition continued, and there were so many lawsuits, it would shut down work.
Yeah.
There would be weeks or months where we wouldn't have any progress going on the project. And during that time, we would just pore over requirements documents, making sure we hadn't missed anything, to ward off any future lawsuits.
Who was suing?
Mostly the state of Nevada.
Okay.
The politicians. And it was very unfortunate. And again, public opinion was based off of all those lawsuits too. That was always in the news. If a new lawsuit was being filed against the Yucca Mountain project, it would be all over the local media. And I think people assumed, well, the more lawsuits that are being filed, the more irresponsible the DOE is being. And it was just an uphill battle.
So it's interesting because you were a scientist, but then you, due to your passion and your expertise, really had to put a lot of energy into this public outreach area. Are there any lessons that you learned throughout this process that you would give to those of us working on energy projects?
I would recommend communication, education, and transparency with the public is so important. I believe in Wyoming here, you have a big advantage, especially having the University of Wyoming involved. So you're going to have many local heroes, per se, working on these projects. It's going to be really hard to be against a project when the kid next door becomes a project manager of, the Natrium project.
Right.
And, And I think people in Wyoming generally are more scientifically...
They're very energy savvy.
Energy savvy.
Yep.
They know, everybody knows somebody who's in the energy field or mining in other parts of the country. Particularly Nevada, it wasn't like that.
You have to be on your A game here in Wyoming on public outreach because you'll never believe some of the questions and how sophisticated they are. So I did a town hall a few weeks ago in Sheridan, and someone walked up to the microphone and asked us about the recent Supreme Court ruling on the Chevron defense. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. I am so unprepared for that question. I did think of a good answer about 45 minutes after the town hall was over. But, it's just a great example. Bring your A game when you have community outreach in Wyoming. And I think, we'll go, for example, we show up here, we have incredible geologists and engineers, lawyers and economists, and such great expertise here at the School of Energy Resources and really across the university. And we go to public hearings or public meetings on specific projects around the state, even when we're not involved. And so it's really great to hear that when landowners or the public will come to our booth and ask our scientists questions, and we're just kind of a neutral party on the side of Wyoming. So it's a really great role and one that's important for a land grant university to play. So we'll take your advice though. And I will say we put a lot of effort into the outreach side as well through those community meetings, website, but always looking for new ways to reach out to people because folks are busy. So it's hard to get to them. So, okay. So big picture, nuclear energy it's documented. If you look at the statistics, it's one of the safest sources of energy. But most opposition to nuclear energy is rooted in safety concerns. So how do you reconcile that?
Again, just get in the facts. Really, the two main events that people remember are Fukushima and Chernobyl.
Yeah.
So perhaps start with the facts there.
What happened?
There and why that really won't happen here. And the risk perception is really interesting because people are more fearful of things that they have no control over. A risk that's imposed upon them.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Is far more emotional than, of course, them going out and taking the risks themselves. So they're going to be more critical of possible risks, and we just need to do our best to alleviate those with education and science and proof.
So let's just dive into that a little bit. So Chernobyl, it was the design of the facility, which is not used anymore,
right,
that caused the issue. Is that?
I understand they had just a poor firewall built into their design, and then it was a series of human errors, one after another. They were trying to ramp it back up, and it went too fast. And
and then one of the things that's important to note is the advanced reactor designs actually have some what's called passive cooling. So they, even if there are human errors, they're like, and all the electricity is shut off to the facility, and there's no pumps or anything to cool the nuclear fuel, which is kind of where some of the risk is not letting that heat up too much. Even in a scenario where there's no way to cool it, it has what's called passive cooling. It will cool itself through essentially air movement through the system. So I think there's been a lot of design improvements. And then in Fukushima, my understanding is that was a freak accident, but of course you have to be ready for freak accidents in that tsunami. And what happened was the same thing. It was, again, the pumps that were responsible for moving liquid that cooled the fuel got covered in water in the tsunami. Had they been placed on the roof, there would have been no issues. So, but even so, what actually happened, if you look at the information, there was not much danger from even what happened in Fukushima. Is that
radiation?
The radiation,
there was very little radiation leak.
Yeah. So, and I think that's a really important point you bring up, and it's fair. It's definitely true that we are more fearful of risks that we don't have control of, even if they're much lower. For example, driving. Driving is very dangerous.
Exactly.
But we're doing it. We're in charge of it. Whereas, I mean, I don't know. Most people aren't as bad as me, but getting on an airplane, I'm just not the person you want to sit next to because I don't have any control of that thing.
Exactly.
Even though it's safer. So, point well taken. So, anything else you want to add about nuclear energy or spent fuel or any of the science or outreach or anything?
Oh, another outreach program that we did. This was very interesting. There were several women geologists on the Yucca Mountain project, both employed by the DOE and Science Applications International. So we would put on Girl Scout geology badge workshops.
Oh, good.
At this information center, and it was wonderful. We'd have 100 Girl Scouts in there each time, with 5 of the women geologists putting that on. And of course, the parents had to drop them off and pick them up.
Yeah.
And so then they would go through the museum, and I think that was very beneficial also.
That's great. And what, did you get to design your own badge?
No, we didn't.
You didn't? Oh, lost opportunity. We have a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise about nuclear energy and about your career. You've really covered some unique topics, both on the science and the public outreach side. So let's talk a little bit about you, and just really want to thank you for establishing the Christi A. Barry Nuclear Energy Student Enrichment Fund. So you're investing in the next generation of students here at the University of Wyoming who can pursue their studies in nuclear energy. And thank you for doing that. So what would you say to prospective students who are considering studying that topic?
Gosh, I would encourage them to get the certification.
Okay, we don't quite offer it yet, but we are working on it.
That.
Once,
okay.
Yeah. But we've started offering courses. So we have the Fundamentals of Nuclear Energy course being offered now. So we already we're building up our coursework at the University of Wyoming. That's just one example. The geology side has other, of course, relevant work. And we haven't even talked about the fact that Wyoming is the largest uranium producer in the nation. So, but anyway, yeah, what would you tell a student in addition to take our future certificate that hopefully will be offered?
So just as our future energy solutions need to be diverse, so should their education.
Yeah.
And as I was an undergrad here, I thought I'd be a petroleum geologist. I had no idea I'd end up in the nuclear power industry. So just, broaden your horizons. Don't stay just in one degree program, and really take advantage of all the opportunities the state of Wyoming is offering you for internships, for field trips, conferences. Take advantage of all of those. And I hope the endowment will help with some of those programs outside of the classroom.
Absolutely. That's a great point. So one of Wyoming's superpowers is we're so close to industry that we do have these field tours where you can go see energy sites across the country and talk to folks who are actually developing the energy projects all around the state. We have so many first-of-a-kind projects moving forward in the state in all different areas. Largest onshore wind farm in North America. We have the, of course, TerraPower Natrium facility. We have several carbon capture and storage projects. We have an enhanced oil recovery. We have expanding trona mines. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. We have great collaboration with our natural gas producers to reduce their methane emissions. Reclamation. Okay, I'll stop now, but this is why it's so exciting to be at SCR. I don't want to leave anyone out, so I'll just say that was a partial list. Definitely didn't cover anything, but that's, we also have undergraduate research opportunities here at the University of Wyoming where you can get really in depth into some of these fields. And we also have a lot of degree programs, to your point, that are very broad. And so you take classes very multidisciplinary from different colleges across the university. And I think, have you ever met anyone, Christi, who had an idea of what they were going to do at the beginning of the career and then had no surprises and just went straight through?
I don't know anyone like that.
So you don't ever know where you're going to go in life. And so we'll just make sure you're ready for whatever.
Exactly.
Wherever you go. So, okay. Well, let's just talk a little bit about you, Christi. So what's your favorite place to visit in Wyoming?
Vedaville.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
You're like the first person that ever had a clear answer like that.
Oh, gosh. I love climbing. And
oh, wow.
What a great place to learn to climb.
Oh, yeah.
I probably spent too much time out there, but...
Well, you made it. You made it through. So, and is there anything else you'd like to share with people, with our listeners about you?
I love to travel the world and do a lot of trekking. I've trekked the Pyrenees Mountains. I've done the Tour de Mont Blanc, which is
wow. Yeah.
Doing the circumference of Mont Blanc through Switzerland and Italy and France. Climbed Mount Olympus in Greece. And the next one is the Camino Trail, which will just be an easy hike.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So, world adventure scientist turned outreach expert on nuclear spent fuel. Christi, thank you so much for being here today, for engaging with the School of Energy Resources, for coming to visit us, giving back to your alma mater. Thank you for everything you do and really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.